the climate crisis is real. But Donald Trump, well, he claims it's a hoax.
Tonight, the race for the White House heats up, literally. Just 6 days to go until Election Day, and tonight, as heat records are broken from coast to coast, millions are on alert for yet another monster storm, and polling places are shifting following not just one, but two catastrophic hurricanes. It's all about climate change, from extreme heat, the deadliest weather-related hazard hitting states across the country, to homes destroyed by raging wildfires and hurricanes. Some of the most dangerous weather-related events in this country are happening with more frequency and deadly effect. And with high confidence in a connection between human-amplified climate change and extreme events, it's climate that's on the ballot for millions of voters.
We will quickly become energy independent, and we will frack, and drill, baby, drill.
Tonight, we take a deeper dive into the issue on the ground, reporting on the dangers lurking in our waters. We learn how voters feel about the issue ahead of the election and speak to the rare conservative group looking to gain more votes through climate change. This is our ABC News Live primetime coverage, the race for the White House. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for streaming with us for this special edition of Race for the White House. Just 6 days to go from tonight. The first polls will have closed, and we'll start to get a full picture of where this race stands. 57 million Americans have already voted, and tonight the two candidates are barnstorming those key 7 battlegrounds. This half hour, we want to talk about an issue that's already affected a few key battleground states this election season: climate change. Hurricanes have steamrolled through North Carolina, Florida, and parts of Georgia in recent days. Tonight, we bring you the pulse of voters on this key issue and take a deeper look at some of the communities it's affecting. On the trail tonight, Trump is speaking in Green Bay, Wisconsin, after days of backlash over that comedian at the Madison Square Garden rally, calling Puerto Rico a floating pile of garbage. Trump is seizing on President Biden's gaffe, seeming to call Trump supporters garbage. And tonight, Vice President Harris is laser focused on her message of unity, reaching out to Republicans and independents. But she was forced to respond to what President Biden said. Our Mary Bruce went one-on-one with the vice president ahead of her rally tonight in North Carolina. We have more ahead on climate change, but we do begin tonight with the latest and the interview with our Mary Bruce and Kamala Harris.
Tonight in the must-win battleground of Pennsylvania, Vice President Kamala Harris promising to unite the nation if she's elected.
We know we have an opportunity in this election to turn the page on a decade of Donald Trump trying to keep us divided and afraid of each other. That is who he is, but Pennsylvania, that is not who we are.
It is her closing message, and last night, with 75,000 people there to hear her speak on the ellipse where Donald Trump gave his speech on January 6th, Harris instead reaching out to independents and Republicans, too.
Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at the table.
But as Harris was speaking, President Biden sparking controversy with his reaction to the speaker at Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden, who denigrated Latinos and Puerto Rico.
I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Biden lashing out.
Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, and it's un-American.
Tonight, the White House insisting the president wasn't calling Trump supporters garbage, but his words creating a headache for Harris. And I asked her about that today when we were given a one-on-one with Harris in the key battleground of North Carolina with less than a week until Election Day.
What did you think when you heard President Biden make those comments?
Well, first of all, I think that the president has explained what he meant. But I've said it earlier. I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. And that I've made that clear throughout my career, including my speech last night before I think this all happened. which is I intend to be a president for all Americans, and including those who may not vote for me in this election. I take very seriously my obligation and my oath to concern myself first with the needs of the American people and put them before whatever might be my selfish issues.
Now, we know this election is going to be extremely close. Liz Cheney is out there campaigning for you. She's urging Republicans to vote for you. She says they don't have to tell anybody. Do you need Republicans to do that in order to win?
Here's how I think about it. I really want to bring our country together. We've had about a decade of this Trump era that has been all about, there's so much about it that's been about dividing people and having Americans point their fingers at each other. And I think people are exhausted with it, and it's not empowering. We're going to all have our differences. We're a democracy. That's what we love about being American. We have those differences, and we have those debates at the Thanksgiving table. It's our nature, but not to the point that we're turning our backs on each other and calling each other the enemy within because we disagree.
Harris says Trump would bring an enemies list to the White House. She would bring a to-do list.
You mentioned that to-do list. You've made clear you're going to be armed with that list if you get into the Oval Office, but you haven't made clear what is at the very top of that list.
Oh, but I have made that clear. My highest priority is to bring down prices and bring down costs. That is one of the biggest issues that is affecting the American people. I've been traveling the country. They know the price of groceries is still too high. I know it's still too high. Bringing down the cost of housing, bringing down taxes for middle-class families so they can not just get by but get ahead. Those are my highest priorities.
In 2020, we saw Donald Trump come out and prematurely claim victory on election night. I know you've got a whole team of lawyers standing at the ready, but what is your plan? What are you going to do if he does that again?
Well, we are sadly ready if he does, if we know that he is actually manipulating the press and attempting to manipulate the consensus of the American people based on fiction instead of fact. We're prepared to respond.
You are promising to bring people together, even people you disagree with. You say, well, have a seat at the table. How do you convince Trump supporters of that, though, when you're calling their candidate a would-be dictator, a petty tyrant?
I am talking to everyone as an American, regardless of who they voted for in the last election.
And one last question. I know you have said that this is a campaign about substance, not identity, but I'm sure it's crossed your mind. What do you think about when you envision the history that you may make?
I'm fully aware of my gender and race, so let's start there. And I know that it will be very significant in terms of the glass that will be broken. But I do not expect that anyone is going to vote for me because of my gender or race. It has to be because I earned their vote with a plan to make their life better.
Mary Bruce, one-on-one with Vice President Kamala Harris. And a short time ago in Green Bay, Wisconsin, former President Trump held a rally wearing an orange safety vest like many sanitation workers wear. And he had this to say, referencing President Biden's comments last night.
Because look at how they've treated you. They treat you like garbage. They treat our whole country like garbage with open borders, with all of the horrible things they've done to hurt our country, inflation that should have never happened.
One of the more divisive issues on the campaign trail is climate change. Joining us now with a look at how important climate change is to voters is 538's Galen Druke. And Galen, where does climate rank when it comes to the importance of voter issues?
Yeah, Lindsay, it doesn't rank particularly highly. So Pew Research has asked Americans, what are the most important issues to your vote? And of the slate of topics that they offered Americans, it actually ranked last. So 37% of Americans saying that it was very important to their vote. Things like the economy or inflation, culture war issues like the Supreme Court, abortion, or immigration ranked well above it. And we also saw a very stark partisan divide, which is to say 62% of Democrats said climate change was very important to their vote. Only 11% of Republicans said it was very important to their vote. I do want to note here, though, that this is not to say that Americans don't believe that climate change is real, that it is mostly human-caused, or that is a threat. On those questions you see in the polling, more than 70% of Americans believe that it is real. A clear majority also say that it is human-caused and a threat. And a majority of Americans even support many of the interventions, like the federal government incentivizing a movement to other energy sources like solar or wind. So not a priority, but not that Americans don't necessarily believe that it's happening.
Now, I know you broke it down for us by Republican, Democrat, but how about by the young vote?
Yeah, that's a good question, because when you look at younger voters, it is clear that they are much more liberal on this issue. They support more interventions to try to combat climate change, but Harvard conducts a youth poll every year regularly, and they asked American young people between the ages of 18 and 29 what their most important issues were. And climate change was in the bottom third. Once again, like all adults in America, the things that rose to the top were really pocketbook issues. You know, number one was inflation, then health care. One thing that really did rise to the top for young people was gun violence. But still, climate change was in the bottom 5 of the things that they asked about.
And are we still seeing that, by and large, these voters trust Kamala Harris more when it comes to climate change?
Yes, I mean, by a real significant clip. So the Associated Press has done regular polling on this, and they found that Americans trust Kamala Harris on climate change by a 26-point margin. And when it comes to the question of even just addressing actual natural disasters and relief, she had an 11-point advantage there.
Galen Druke, always a pleasure to break down the numbers with you. Tonight, there's a hidden threat around Texas in at least 25 other states that's not being monitored nearly enough. We're talking about millions of abandoned oil and gas wells. They can contaminate groundwater and spew carcinogenic chemicals and harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So ABC News Investigates partnered with ABC News Live and owned stations and affiliates to conduct the largest news investigation of its kind. Here's a short clip of our ABC News investigation from Kana Whitworth. Zombie wells, the threat beneath.
From a distance, the shallow waters of Trinity Bay, just outside Houston, can appear almost pristine. But hidden in plain sight lies a threat few are even aware of.
We are headed out into Trinity Bay, and that is where they believe there is the largest concentration of these abandoned offshore wells. And the concern is that they're leaking.
More than 100 abandoned oil and gas wells have been left to rot in this bay for decades. They're considered abandoned because they haven't produced in years.
We are utterly surrounded in every direction by abandoned oil and gas wells.
Like most abandoned wells, these decaying rigs are rarely checked for leaks, which is why we've come to see if we can detect any ourselves. As we approach one well, we hear an ominous sound.
This is hissing. I can hear it.
We've brought along a handheld gas detector that experts told us could detect if a well is leaking combustible gas.
There, it's going. It's going. It's going. The second I put it over here. Typically, these aging wells, when they leak gas, it is methane. So that is a dangerous greenhouse gas.
Nearby, we find another abandoned well where there's bubbling just below the surface.
You can see this thing just bubbling everywhere. Oh, it's high, high.
This is a dark side of the fossil fuel industry. A hidden, mostly invisible threat lurking just beneath the surface of more than 25 states. There are more than 3.5 million abandoned oil and gas wells across the U.S. that we know of.
We've found that around 14 million Americans live within a mile of an abandoned well.
Those that leak are known in Texas as zombie wells.
A zombie is something that's been killed or dead and comes back to life. That's what I call a zombie well. They're coming back to life.
Leaking abandoned wells can contaminate groundwater and spew carcinogenic chemicals and harmful greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
These wells are a threat to people and livelihoods, and especially kids and older people and people with health problems.
Yet despite the risks, experts we spoke with say not enough are inspected for leaks. Which is why ABC News, along with 6 owned and affiliated stations, set out on the largest journalistic investigation of its kind. fanning out across the nation with gas detectors to hunt down and test abandoned wells for dangerous leaks. In all, our team tested 76 wells across 5 states and found 40, more than half, were leaking oil or combustible gas at the time.
Almost immediately. And straight up to the high end. It's topped out already at 10,100.
That leak could just go on for years and years and years.
We discovered leaking wells along streams in New York and atop sunlit hills in California.
This is just full of oil.
But nowhere has more abandoned wells than Texas.
And you can catch more of Kana's reporting in an ABC News Live special in the coming weeks, Zombie Wells, The Threat Beneath. And Kana Whitworth joins us now. And Kana, I know you've traveled around the country the past few years doing a lot of different climate reports for ABC News Live, from Texas to Montana, numerous reports in California. I imagine that most residents, regardless of political party, just care about the changes in their community, whether it be oil or flooding or any other disasters. Give us a sense of the people you've met and what you've seen.
Right, you know, Linsey, really it comes down to the quality of life that these people want, and that does mean environmental changes within their own communities. And especially, Linsey, you see people that live in those rural areas, they feel really forgotten about. But ultimately, you know, this is not a partisan issue here, and I think sometimes there's this idea nationally that Republicans don't care about the environment. But when you get to these communities and you're speaking with local leaders and community members, that's just not the case there. They all want a better, healthier, safer community. And really, if you're speaking with, a Texas rancher, I spoke with tribal leaders here in California, community members in Butte, Montana, even residents of Las Vegas that were worried about the dwindling water supply in Lake Mead. It's interesting, Linsey, because they want change. They need leadership to make that change. They need money to make that change. But really what it's about, Linsey, every single person in every swath of this country, what it comes down to is the future. They, Linsey, are thinking about their children. They're not trying to make environmental changes for themselves. They want a better future for their children. And it's the same thing that you hear over and over again. And it's a really emotional chord there.
We can imagine. And it's so understandable. Kana Whitworth, our thanks to you, as always. Really meaningful work you're doing. And still to come, if you think party affiliation defines views on climate change, our next guest might have you thinking again. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. Our next guest reminds us that where you lie on the political spectrum isn't always a good indicator of what you think that we should or should not be doing about climate change. Chris Barnard is president of the American Conservation Coalition, whose mission is to build the conservative environmental movement. Chris, great to have you on the show. Just explain what the conservative environmental movement is.
Look, once upon a time, conservation and environmental issues were really kind of a bipartisan issue. And actually, if you go back as far as Teddy Roosevelt, who we know as the conservation president, he was a Republican. He believed that being a conservative and being a good steward of the environment are two sides of the same coin. And when you think about the meaning of conserving and being a conservationist, those are really kind of two sides of the same coin. And so ACC exists to bring conservatives back to the environmental table and show that actually we care as well and we want to be part of this conversation.
And many see a struggle between conservation and capitalism, but your organization believes that capitalism can help conservation efforts. Give us an example.
Well, at the end of the day, the way that you solve these most important problems is through innovation and through technology, and capitalism is the means by which you unleash these technologies. If we want to have more effective renewables or more effective battery storage technologies, if we want to be able to grow the economy while reducing emissions, the way that you do that is not by having heavy mandates or heavy regulations that constrict creativity. It's by unleashing innovation, by empowering entrepreneurs to come up with the best solutions possible. I think capitalism is the best system to make something like that happen.
Last month, Microsoft made a deal to restart the 3 Mile Island nuclear facility in Pennsylvania. And your coalition stance is that we need more nuclear, not less. But what do you tell people to assuage their fears?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that if you care about climate change and about reducing emissions and you're not pro-nuclear energy, you're probably not serious about this issue. Nuclear is the largest source of clean electricity in America. It is a baseload source of energy, meaning that it can provide clean electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I know some people are worried about the safety. Really, there's actually been no deaths from nuclear in the United States. A lot of safety fears have been overblown by environmental groups that are not in favor of nuclear and have really kind of fear-mongered about it. I think that the track record speaks for itself. And if we truly want to have more baseload clean energy in America, nuclear has to be top of the pile.
On one part of your website, you say that America must stand up to China, but elsewhere you laud them for building the nuclear plants, solar panels, and car batteries that people want. Is it that we need to learn from the Chinese, not necessarily stand up to them?
Well, look, the reality is that America has offshored a lot of production to other countries, especially to China, and we should not be reliant on our adversaries for our basic energy needs. If we want to have this clean energy future, our view is that we should be building it here in the United States. We've seen what happens to countries like Germany when they rely on adversaries like Russia. We cannot afford to have our energy supply chains of the future be dominated by a country that does not have our best interests at heart. And so our view is that we should be actually coming up with battery storage, manufacturing and technologies here. We should be building solar panels and wind turbines and nuclear facilities here in the United States and competing with China on this rather than offshoring our technology and our manufacturing to them.
President of the American Conservation Coalition, Chris Barnard, we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now it's time to bring in our ABC News contributors, former national political director for Hillary Clinton, Amanda Renteria, and former Trump administration official Sarah Isgur. Thank you both so much for joining us. Sarah, let's start with you. How is Chris Barnard's message on the environment resonating with Republicans, and is it steering their votes at all?
I think for Republicans, when they think about the climate change issue, they're really looking at it as a trade-off. What they hear with that shorthand of climate change as a political issue is really economic loss for the United States because China, several of our adversary countries, Russia, Iran, for instance, they're not fighting climate change. So their economies are going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to pollute. And so when they hear it as a political issue, I think they hear it as simply another term for liberal policies. But when Republicans are talking about energy independence, they're talking about climate change. We produce cleaner fuels than these other countries. We have technology far ahead to actually maybe make a breakthrough on clean energies. So energy independence is often what Republicans are saying when they're talking about environmental issues.
And Amanda, how are environmental concerns influencing the Democratic vote?
So this is one where Sarah and I are going to agree. I think this is common ground here. It's true. Sometimes the words we use actually might create the division. In this case, I think when we start to talk about climate change and a lot of the manufacturing investments that this administration has put into has been actually manufacturing clean energy opportunities for those rural America areas that folks have been talking about that are facing some of these challenges, and it can turn into an opportunity. And in this way, this is where business and environmentalists can really come together to say, what are our economies of the future? And let's start to build them together. I think this is one of the key moments that is great in a bipartisan way that can get back to, as Chris was saying, a bipartisan conversation and really build the energy for the future that makes us both independent and also moving towards a new kind of economy.
And Amanda, I want to stick with you. As you both know, parts of North Carolina, a battleground in this election. They're still cleaning up from Hurricane Helene. To what degree do extreme weather events like these influence voters? You had back-to-back hurricanes largely impacting the same areas.
So this is one thing that's interesting to me, that there's not actually enough conversation about how this is created by climate change. And one of the conversations we need to start having as we move forward is, what does the climate emergency response also look like? We are now more and more beginning to realize, families have to figure out what to do when these moments happen. And this is why it's so disturbing that we have a candidate right now, Trump, who still talks about climate change as a hoax and that there's nothing we can do about it. This is an opportunity for the country to come together, not only in those emergency response times, but for investments we need to get the economy moving in a new direction.
And Sarah, the Biden administration has invested in advancing green energy like wind and solar farms in the U.S. How do these initiatives play with voters?
as Galen was saying, I don't think this is a top issue for voters unless you make it about how it's going to affect their jobs, the prices at their grocery store. Again, climate change as a term has basically become a stand-in for the word Democrat or liberal or progressive. I think when you actually talk about specific policies, we're investing in new energy technologies. We want to be energy independent. America acting alone can't fight climate change. So there's no point in destroying our economy when we can't solve climate change without those other countries that aren't going to participate in this. So technology is the way we're going to move past this. And I think when you talk to voters about that and about job creation, they're a lot more interested.
Amanda, do you disagree? Agree with Sarah?
I absolutely agree. We do need to talk about it as a jobs economy moving forward. Exactly. So Sarah and I, we could figure this out.
All right. Well, that's what we like to hear. Little bipartisan workmanship there. Sarah, we thank you. And Amanda, we thank you both so much for your time. And that is our show for this hour. I'm Linsey Davis. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.